I want to start with the thing I'm most ashamed of. Not what she did, what I did, or more precisely, what I almost did because of what she did. I almost became someone I would not have recognized. I almost let the anger make the decisions. I almost walked into a situation with nothing but the raw, unprocessed fury of a man who has just discovered that the person he reorganized his entire life around has been treating that life as something temporary and optional. I came very close. I want to be honest about that because I think the stories that leave that part out are missing something true. The part where you were sitting in a parking garage at 9 in the evening with your hands on the steering wheel and you're deciding in real time whether you're going to be the person you want to be or the person the situation is trying to make you. I chose to be the person I wanted to be. But it was not easy and it was not instant, and I think anyone who tells you it was is either lying or was not paying attention to themselves. My name is not important. You can call me Lucas. I was 38 years old, a freelance architect, and I had been with my girlfriend of 4 years, a woman named Hannah, for what I had believed was the most honest relationship of my adult life. Let me tell you about Hannah, because she was not a simple person, and what she did was not a simple thing, and I think flattening either of those realities would dishonor the complexity of what actually happened. She was 35 years old, a product designer at a tech company, intelligent and aesthetically precise, and possessed of a quality I had found deeply attractive from the first time we met, a directness that felt rare. She said what she thought. She did not hedge or soften or perform uncertainty she did not feel. She had opinions about things, and she stated them, and she was willing to be disagreed with and to argue and to change her position when she encountered a better one. I had been, before Hannah, in 2 long relationships that had ended partly because the women I was with had not felt safe being fully honest with me about what they wanted and needed. I had done a lot of work on myself in the years between those relationships and Hannah. I had come to believe that I was someone who could be trusted with honesty. And then I discovered that the woman I had chosen specifically for her directness had been conducting a parallel relationship for 7 months and had not once, in any of the hundreds of honest conversations we had during those 7 months, said a single word about it. We had been living together for 2 years when it happened. We had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood we had chosen together after 3 months of looking and one extended argument about proximity to public transit versus proximity to a park that we had resolved by finding an apartment that was a 7-minute walk to both. I had converted the 2nd bedroom into a studio where I did most of my architectural drafting. Hannah had a setup at the kitchen table that she preferred to a desk because she liked, she said, to be in the center of the space rather than at its edge. We had a routine that we had built together over 2 years, and that had the specific, comfortable efficiency of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms well enough to move around each other without friction. I loved that routine. I loved the specific quality of a life built with someone who was paying attention. I thought we were both paying attention. I was wrong about the both. I found out on a Tuesday evening in March in the most ordinary possible way. I was on the couch reading. Hannah was at her kitchen table set up working late on a project. Her phone was on the table beside her laptop, and it rang. A video call, not an audio one, and the name on the screen was visible from where I was sitting. The name was Ben. I knew Ben. I had met Ben twice at industry events Hannah had brought me to. He was a developer at a company that worked with Hannah's firm on collaborative projects. He was 37, tall, the kind of easy social confidence that fills a room without appearing to try. I had no particular feelings about Ben. He was a colleague of Hannah's, and I had had 2 unremarkable conversations with him at industry events, and that was the entirety of my relationship with the name Ben. Hannah saw the call notification, and she looked up and she looked across the room at me, and the expression on her face in that moment, before she composed it, before she made the decision about what to do with her face, told me everything I needed to know. She declined the call. She said it was a work thing, and she would call him back in the morning. I said, okay. I went back to my book. I did not read a single word of it for the next 40 minutes. I want to tell you what I did over the following 4 days, because those 4 days were the ones that determined everything. I did not confront Hannah. I did not go through her phone. I did not change my behavior toward her by a degree that she would have been able to detect. What I did was think. I'm an architect. My entire professional practice is built on the discipline of understanding a structure completely before you make any decisions about how to engage with it. You do not start demolishing a wall before you know whether it is load-bearing. You do not start a conversation before you know what the conversation is actually about. I did not know yet, from one expression on a Tuesday evening, what the conversation was about. I knew what the expression had looked like. I knew what it had reminded me of. I did not act on that. I waited. I watched. I thought. And on the fourth day, a Saturday morning, when Hannah said she was going to the gym, I watched her leave the apartment, and I sat at my drafting table, and I opened my laptop, and I began the process of finding out what I needed to know before I said anything to anyone. What I found in the first hour of looking was not conclusive, but it was directional. I searched Ben's name in the context of Hannah's professional network. His LinkedIn profile was public. His recent activity included a post from 6 weeks ago about a collaborative project with Hannah's firm. A post she had commented on with a specificity that suggested more familiarity with the details of his work than a standard professional relationship would typically produce. I looked at the timestamps of her work-late evenings over the past few months. I was not tracking Hannah's schedule in any systematic way, but I had a general awareness of her patterns from 2 years of shared life, and I could identify, from memory, 6 or 7 evenings in the past 4 months where she had stayed late or gone in on a weekend for reasons I had accepted without examination because I trusted her and because she had always been transparent about her work demands. I pulled up the shared calendar we used for household logistics. I cross-referenced what I could. The picture that was emerging was not yet a picture. It was a suggestion of a picture. But I am trained to read structural suggestions, and I knew what this one was suggesting. I called my closest friend Adrian that Saturday afternoon. Adrian was a litigation attorney and someone I had known for 14 years and who I trusted with the kind of conversation that requires someone who will listen before they speak and mean what they say when they speak. I told him what I had seen and what I had found in the first hour of looking. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Lucas, you need to talk to a divorce attorney." I said, "We are not married." He said, "You need to talk to a relationship property attorney then. You have 2 years of shared tenancy, shared expenses, a shared lease. If this is what it appears to be and you decide to separate, the financial picture of that separation needs to be understood before you have any conversation with Hannah." I said, "I know." He said, "I have a name for you. Call her Monday morning." I said, "I will." He said, "And Lucas, do not confront Hannah before you have spoken to the attorney." I said, "I know." He said, "I know you know. I am saying it anyway." I said, "I understand." I made dinner that evening. Hannah came home from the gym. We ate together. I asked about her project. She told me about it. I listened, and I said nothing about any of it. Monday morning, I called Patricia Shun. Adrian had described her as the person you want when the stakes are real and the other side is going to be motivated. I called at 8:30. She answered. I told her the situation in 10 minutes. She asked 5 questions. The third question was, "Do you have any documented evidence of the relationship, or is this currently inferential?" I said, "Currently inferential." She said, "I want you to speak to an investigator before we go further. I have someone excellent. Her name is Carol Watts." I said, "How quickly can she begin?" Patricia said, "I will call her today. Can you come in Wednesday with whatever financial documentation you have access to, shared lease, shared accounts, any records of joint expenses, or shared financial obligations?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Come in at 9. Do not access any shared financial accounts beyond reading your normal statements. Do not change any passwords or access levels." I said, "I understand." She said, "And do not say anything to Hannah until after Wednesday." I said, "I have not said anything to anyone except one friend." She said, "Good." Wednesday at 9. Wednesday morning, I brought everything Patricia had asked for. The shared lease. 12 months of shared household expense records. The joint account we had opened 8 months ago for apartment expenses, utilities, groceries, household items. Patricia reviewed everything and made notes. Then she said, "The financial picture here is straightforward. The joint account has a current balance of $4,200, to which you have contributed 60%, and she has contributed 40% based on the records you have brought. In a separation, that account would be divided in proportion to contributions unless there is a documented agreement to the contrary. There are no other significant shared assets beyond the lease itself, which has 4 months remaining. The financial exposure in a separation is limited. I said, I understand. She said, what I want you to focus on for the next 10 days is letting Carol do her work. If Carol's report confirms what you suspect, we will have a complete picture and a clear path. If it does not confirm it, you will have spent 10 days being certain before you made any permanent decision. Either outcome is better than acting on inference. I said, I agree completely. She said, Carol starts today. Carol Watts started that Wednesday and delivered her report 11 days later. Those 11 days were the ones I described at the beginning of this story. The parking garage evenings, the steering wheel, the decision about who I was going to be. I want to expand on that because I think it deserves more than a passing reference. Living with someone while you are waiting to find out the full truth of what they have been doing is a specific kind of experience that I do not think has an adequate description in ordinary language. You are simultaneously the person you have always been in that relationship, and a person who knows that the relationship is in the process of being fundamentally redefined. You're having dinner with someone and asking about their day and listening to their answer, and the answer is, in the ordinary sense, genuine. They're telling you about their actual day, the actual things that happened, the actual thoughts they had. And underneath all of that, there's a layer of the conversation that neither of you is having out loud, and that is the only layer that actually matters right now. I held that tension for 11 days. I did not drop it once. Carol's report arrived on a Sunday evening. Patricia called me Monday morning and said, come in today if you can. I was there at 11. I read the report at her conference table in 35 minutes. The report documented the following. Carol had established through professional network observation, public record cross-referencing, and direct surveillance that Ben and Hannah had been in a relationship for approximately 7 months. She had documented 16 confirmed meetings across a 10-week observation window. 9 of the meetings had taken place at Ben's apartment, 4 at restaurants, 2 at a hotel outside the city, 1 in a location that Carol described as consistent with a day trip. The 16 documented meetings were consistent with a regular, ongoing intimate relationship that showed no signs of having concluded or diminished. The pattern of meetings cross-referenced against Hannah's stated work commitments and gym attendance identified 14 occasions on which she had given me an explanation that was inconsistent with her documented whereabouts. I read the last page. I closed the report. I looked out the window of Patricia's office for a moment. Then I looked at Patricia and I said, how do I do this well? She said, what does doing it well mean to you? I said, it means I'm honest with her, and I am not cruel, and I do not let the anger make any of the decisions. She said, then you already know how to do it. I told Hannah on a Tuesday evening. I had chosen Tuesday deliberately, not a weekend when the weight of it would sit over 2 unstructured days, not a Monday when the week was just beginning, but a Tuesday when there was enough week left to process the immediate aftermath without the specific pressure of either. I had also chosen deliberately to tell her before she sat down at her kitchen table setup. She came through the door at 6:45 and I was sitting on the couch and I said, Hannah, I need to tell you something before you put your bag down. Something in my voice made her stop. She looked at me. I said, I know about Ben. I said it quietly and without embellishment, and I watched her face do the thing that faces do when a truth that has been held in place by concealment is suddenly released. Not a collapse exactly, more like a very controlled deflation. She put her bag down after all. She sat in the chair across from me. She said, how long have you known? I said, I've been finding out for the past 3 weeks. She said, I'm sorry, Lucas. I said, I know. She said, I did not know how to tell you. I said, I know that too. And then I told her that I was ending the relationship and that I wanted to handle the practical separation cleanly and without extended conflict. She said, I want the same thing. The conversation that followed was 2 hours long. I want to be honest about those 2 hours because they were painful and also because they were, in their own strange way, some of the most honest hours Hannah and I had ever spent together. She told me how it had started, the collaboration on a project, late evenings, the specific intimacy of shared professional pressure. She told me she had not intended for it to become what it became. She told me she had been trying to find a way to tell me for months and had not found one that felt like it would not destroy everything immediately. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not perform generosity. I did not feel. I felt genuine compassion for the position she had been in, not for the choices she had made, but for the human experience of being stuck between two lives and not knowing how to resolve the stuckness. I also felt genuine grief for the relationship, for the 4 years, for the life we had built in the apartment with the 7-minute walk to the park and the transit and the kitchen table setup and my drafting room. I held both of those feelings at the same time, and I did not let either of them make the decisions. The decisions had already been made. The practical separation took 3 weeks to complete. Patricia handled the financial elements with the efficiency that the relative simplicity of our shared finances permitted. The joint account was divided in proportion to contributions. The lease had 4 months remaining, and Hannah agreed to take it. She wanted to stay in the apartment, and I did not want to stay in the apartment, and that alignment made the practical resolution straightforward. I found a short-term rental 2 neighborhoods away while I looked for a permanent place. I moved my drafting equipment in 2 trips on a Saturday. Hannah was not in the apartment when I moved because we had agreed that was better for both of us, and because she was, in the ways that mattered in those practical moments, as considerate of what the process required as she was capable of being. I will say that for her, the ending was as clean as an ending that begins with a 7-month deception can be. Patricia told me afterward that she had handled hundreds of separations and that the ones that resolved cleanly were almost always the ones where at least one party had decided from the beginning that clarity and decency were not negotiable. I said, I had made that decision before I walked into your office. She said, I know. It showed. Ben, I want to address him because I've been thinking about how to address him throughout this story, and I have landed on this. I do not bear Ben's significant anger. He did not know me. He had met me twice at industry events, and we had had 2 unremarkable conversations, and beyond that I was, to him, an abstraction, the boyfriend of someone he had developed feelings for. He had not violated any obligation to me personally. He had participated in something that damaged my life, but he had not done so with malice toward me, and I do not think he understood the full cost of what he was participating in. I reached out to him once, about 6 weeks after Hannah and I separated. Not in anger. A single message that said, I know what happened. I'm not writing to cause you difficulty. I am writing because I think you deserve to know that it is over and that I handled it as well as I know how to handle something like this. He replied the following day. He said, I did not know the full picture of her situation with you. I'm sorry for my part in what happened to you. I said, I appreciate that. I did not write again. That was the entirety of our contact on the subject. I want to tell you about the apartment I found because I think it matters to the ending of this story more than it might seem like it should. I spent 6 weeks in a short-term rental, and then I found a 1-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in a neighborhood I had always liked but had not lived in before. The apartment had large north-facing windows that produced the specific quality of diffuse, consistent light that is ideal for architectural drafting. It had a small balcony that faced a courtyard with 2 old trees whose branches were level with the railing. It was smaller than the apartment I had shared with Hannah. It was entirely mine. I moved in on a Saturday in June, and I spent the afternoon setting up my drafting equipment by the north windows, and at 6 in the evening, I sat on the balcony with a coffee, and I looked at the trees, and I thought about the 4 years. Not with bitterness, with something closer to a clear-eyed accounting. 4 years of a genuine connection that had been real, even if its ending had revealed it to be incomplete. A relationship that had given me things I was glad to have received, and that had cost me things I had not expected to pay. A net experience that I was still in the process of understanding, and that I was not going to pretend I had fully processed simply because the legal and practical dimensions of it had been resolved cleanly. I am 40 years old now. The drafting studio by the north windows has produced some of the best work I have done in 15 years of practice. I do not know if that is because of the light or because of the specific quality of attention that comes from having rebuilt a life deliberately and from having nothing in it that is there by accident or inertia. Probably both. I am in a relationship. Her name is May, and she is a structural engineer, and we met 9 months ago at a professional conference, and the first conversation we had lasted 4 hours and covered everything from cantilever load distribution to the specific ethical dimensions of designing buildings in neighborhoods undergoing gentrification. And I thought, somewhere in the second hour of it, that I recognized the quality of this conversation from somewhere. I did not say that out loud. I filed it carefully, and I went home and I thought about it. The following week, I asked her to dinner. She said yes. We have been building something slowly and carefully since then. I do not rush it. I do not take it for granted. I notice it every day. I am grateful for it every day. Hannah and I are not in contact. That is not a hostile arrangement. It is simply the arrangement that makes the most sense for two people who ended something that had gone wrong in a way that both of them, in their different ways, contributed to. I do not say that to distribute responsibility for the deception. The deception was her choice, and its consequences were real and lasting. I say it because I've spent 2 years being honest with myself about what the 4 years actually were and what my own role in their arc was. I had been present in the relationship in the ways I was good at. I had been less present in some of the ways that I was less good at. The emotional attentiveness, the willingness to ask directly when something felt different, the discipline of not letting professional absorption stand in for genuine engagement. I had loved Hannah. I had also, in some periods of those 4 years, loved her from slight distance. I do not think that excuses what she did. I think it is simply true, and the true version of a story is the only one worth carrying forward. Something I think about sometimes is the expression on her face when Ben's call came through on that Tuesday evening. The expression before the composition, before she decided what her face was going to do. I think about what it must have cost her to carry that for 7 months. Not as a defense of the choice she made, as a recognition of what concealment cost the person doing the concealing. The weight of maintaining 2 separate versions of a life. The specific exhaustion of being fully honest with one person about everything except the one thing that matters most. I think that exhaustion was visible in her face in that fraction of a second before she composed it. And I think that if either of us had been more willing to have the harder conversations earlier, if she had been willing to tell me when things changed for her, and if I had been more present and attentive in a way that might have made her feel that telling me was possible, the story might have had a different shape. I do not know that for certain. I know it is possible. I hold that possibility without letting it become a way of reassigning responsibility for what happened. It is simply part of the complete, honest picture, which is the only kind I know how to keep. I want to tell you about a moment that happened about 4 months after Hannah and I separated that I have not told many people. I was in the short-term rental. It was a Sunday morning, and I was sitting at the small table by the window with coffee, and I was going through some boxes I had not unpacked since moving out of the apartment. In one of the boxes, I found a postcard. It was from a trip Hannah and I had taken to Lisbon in year 2 of the relationship, a city I had wanted to visit for years because of the architecture, and that had been, in every way, exactly what I had hoped it would be. She had bought the postcard at a shop near the waterfront and had written on the back of it before giving it to me. The postcard said, "To the man who looks at buildings the way most people look at people." I read it twice. I put it back in a box, and I closed the box, and I sat with my coffee and looked out the window at the ordinary street, and I thought, that was real. All of it was real. And it ended, and the ending was painful, and the cause of the ending was a real betrayal. And all of those things are simultaneously true. Complexity is not a reason for dishonesty. It is just the honest shape of most things. Someone asked me recently what I had learned. I thought about it for longer than they probably expected. Then I said, I learned that directness and honesty are not the same thing. You can be a direct person, someone who states their opinions and argues their positions and says what they think, and still be capable of the specific dishonesty of omission, of not saying the thing that matters most, because saying it would cost you something you're not ready to pay. Hannah was the most direct person I had known. She was also capable of 7 months of the most consequential omission of my adult life. Those two things coexisted in her, and I had not understood that they could until they did. I also said, I learned that the way you end something is as important as how you built it. That the decisions you make in the parking garage with your hands on the steering wheel, when you're deciding whether to be the person you want to be or the person the anger wants to make you, matter as much as any other decision in the whole story. I made the right decision in that parking garage. Not because it was easy, because I had decided before I found out anything that the person I wanted to be was not someone who let the worst moments define the whole arc. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a comment. This is Reddit Confessions. Subscribe. New story every single week.